Let's go.
Let's go. Cheers.
Cheers. Okay, welcome to anyone that's watching. My name's Ben.
I'm Amy.
And we're from the Agile Avengers. We're Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, currently working at Vodafone UK. And we're currently in lockdown because of the COVID pandemic. So we thought we'd have some discussions and we'd share those with you guys based on what's going on in our teams and our organizations at the moment. I was going to call these COVID conversations, but the more I repeat it in my head, the more I think it sounds awful.
It does. It does. I don't know. Maybe it'll catch on. We'll see.
So we were going to kick off by having a chat today about what is the difference between being a Scrum Master in a very co-located hands-on environment and switching to being a Scrum Master in a completely remote environment. We are all located in the same office in London at Vodafone. We all sit with our teams, we all do all of our work together in the same building, and now everyone is working remotely, and it's been a huge change.
Definitely. And I think, there's some stuff that you anticipate is going to happen, and it's going to be a struggle and a challenge. We all know that face-to-face communication is much better than any other form. So we knew that was going to be difficult. We knew doing everything through video and online tools was always going to be a challenge. But I do think that there was a lot of things that maybe we couldn't have accounted for and that added that additional challenge as well. And I think this will be the same for a lot of companies and a lot of people. This will change the way we work moving forward.
100%.
So I think it's slightly different for you and I. Do you want to tell us a little bit about a couple of your key learnings so far?
Yeah. So I am the Scrum Master for two squads, both in a very similar area within digital marketing. And these squads, I was fortunate in that these teams are both quite mature and they're really well bonded. And it's meant that as we've moved from all being sat together to all being remote, it's not been super tricky to get them all to communicate regularly, to keep up relationships, because they already had those relationships there. And it's something that I'm quite grateful for. And I think it would be really tricky otherwise. I'm quite grateful that these guys are all, they've already built strong friendships, strong relationships, strong working relationships, because it means that now they're all remote. They're not worried about phoning each other up. They're not worried about, regular communication. They're not scared about pestering each other. Whereas I think if you were in a team where you just formed or where you didn't know each other very well and you didn't have those strong relationships, I think you could be nervous to reach out so regularly and to communicate so frequently, just because you haven't got that bond, and you might be scared you're pestering them too much, or you won't have so much kind of small talk and social chit chat, which is super important at the moment. So, Amy, why don't you share a bit about where you're at the moment?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, it's a really, really different scenario. So I was actually due to start a different role, still in Vodafone, so I'm just moving from one place to the other, on the 1st of April. So I was going into a tribe to be their Agile coach, so not with any particular teams, but this is a fairly new tribe, only been around for a couple of months. And there's some real variations in the way they work and how they do things and the understanding of Agile. So I didn't know any of these people really. I knew a couple of them, but generally speaking, no existing relationships. That's kind of one side of my role. And then the other side was looking at how we could transform the working culture in the office. Again, starting from the 1st of April. So both of those quite challenging to do. Definitely changing the culture in the office, hugely challenging because we're not in the office. But there's still a lot of stuff that I have been doing that I can do, but I think they've been two massive hurdles to overcome. Still working with teams, still working with a lot of Scrum Masters, but I think the biggest thing for me that I've kind of really focused on is because we're not in the office and because we can't see people face to face, you can't pick up on the cues that we normally would. We can't pick up on those. Actually, that person doesn't seem quite right today. They just didn't talk the way they normally do in stand-up. So I'm just going to check in with them for 5 minutes whilst making a cup of coffee. We don't have the ability to do that. So being able to understand how people feel and what's going on for them day to day was much harder. And I think one of the big things that we did early on was introduced a tool to help us do that as Scrum Masters. And actually it's going from strength to strength. And we've now got a really good idea of how our people are feeling. We can see trends across tribes, across teams. We can see it across chapters. We can understand what challenges people are really facing and do something about it and do it quickly because we're getting that feedback every day. It's a tool that we use called Team Moods. I'm sure we'll share more information on it somewhere if people want that, but effectively we've got over 3,000 responses. We've got 20 to 30 teams in there now with huge amounts of kind of feedback, instant comments. And I think for me, that's made a huge difference because it's allowed us to help our people when they need it. And I think without that, we could have very easily and very quickly fallen into quite a bad place. I think people wise, ultimately this is a tough time regardless. That such a massive change for work is huge. Then you've got all the extra anxiety and stresses of what's going on in the world. We want to do everything we can as Scrum Masters to support our people. And I think this has massively helped us understand what they need from us to be able to support them. So for me, that's kind of a big thing that we've done that's made a big difference.
Amy, why don't you just tell everyone in summary, what is Team Moods and what is the key data or the key kind of information about our people it's picked up since lockdown?
So Team Moods effectively once a day, either through Slack or email, people get a notification which says, how was your day? Rate from 1 to 5, like bad, horrible, good, excellent type thing. So really, really quick feedback, really easy, which I think massively helps with engagement. The thing we noticed straight away was people saying how many extra meetings they had put in. We were so conscious to make sure that everyone was okay that we put all these extra meetings in to make sure that we didn't have lose that connection we had in our teams. There was a bunch of extra meetings going in with managers, with chapters, with 2 stand-ups a day instead of 1, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden people would spend the full day on their laptop on calls. So they had no time to actually do any work. So it actually ended up having the adverse effect to the reason it was going in. So we made some adjustments, we worked around that. And then I think the other thing that people call out a lot of that they like is having time where we do social stuff. So pub quizzes, bring me games, all of that sort of stuff where people can have time to just talk socially like they normally would in the office that they don't do at the moment. Ben, you talked about your team are in that position where they will just pick up the phone to each other because they've got that relationship. But for the teams who don't have that relationship, I think that time put aside for non-work related stuff, team building stuff, has been like hugely needed. And it is something that I would massively recommend to anyone if they're not doing it already.
Why don't you tell everyone about Bring Me? I love that game.
Yes. So I think that a lot of people will know what this game is. I think there'll be a lot of people who play it not just with teams in work, possibly with family members as well. So
bit of a party game.
It is a bit of a party game. Now we've got a work version. I know I definitely do this with my family when we play it. We do have a non-work version, which does involve a few gins. But the work game, effectively, you get a list of items. You have somebody who's a facilitator. This can be anybody in the group. So it doesn't just have to be a Scrum Master. And the point of the game is to ask for an item from somewhere around the house and everybody has to run away and go and get it and then bring it back. And the person who's first gets a point, or you might want to do 1, 2, 3, depending on your team size. And it can be really obscure. It can be really simple, you know, everything from go and get me a fork to go and get me something green from your fridge, like really go and find me your toothbrush or anything like that. I think on our list we've put sleeping bag. Now I'm not sure how many people would have a sleeping bag, but I also feel like a lot of people won't keep their sleeping bags in lofts, so people might be waiting a while if you choose that one. But yeah, it's just a really quick high energy game that gets people laughing and joking, and kind of used at any point in any sort of session as well, I think. So yeah, you've written that one up. I think it's by the time this video is out, it will be live, so we'll share that as well in the links for this.
Yeah, the games has been super important, and it's, I don't know, it can be really easy to hear people referring to doing fun stuff at work and think, oh, that's a bit fluffy, or, you know, that's not really necessary, it needs to be a professional environment. But actually, I don't think anyone could quite anticipate just how big of an impact being in isolation would be on those social interactions that you take for granted. So when you're in the office, you commute in, so, you know, you might bump into people on your way when you're walking to work. You get into the office, you're going to have a bit of chit chat around the desk about how was your weekend. You know, you bump into people when you go and make a coffee. You might go and grab lunch with somebody. You might, you know, have a bit of social chat and kind of banter over the desk about what's going on in the world at the moment. And actually that stuff is really important, not just for team building, but also just for your own kind of well-being. I can't remember where the study was, and I'm not going to try and quote it because I'll get in trouble. But I'm sure that somewhere someone has said that the biggest factor on your mortality rate or how long you'll live is the quality of your social interactions. So if you're very isolated and you don't have great social interactions, you tend to live a shorter life. And if you've got great social interactions, you tend to live for longer. And actually, when everyone's in isolation, I think that starts to become a bit more, you can almost associate with it a little bit better. And so I guess what's happened is, like you were saying earlier about the back-to-back meetings, you can have all of a sudden a diary which is like phone call after phone call, and you don't get the same amount of social small talk and catching up on a call, because if you were in person, you might be waiting outside the meeting room for 2 minutes and have a chit chat. You know, when someone comes in wearing a funny coloured shirt, you might have a bit of a joke about it, or they've had a haircut or whatever, and you just don't get that on calls. So we've had to make a real effort to actually have time at the beginning of a call, you know, breaks during the middle, at the end. If it's a longer session, having like 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a long session just to catch up and have chit chat. But you almost need to be quite, you really need to factor that in. You need to be quite deliberate about having fun and games. And actually, the feedback that we've had, certainly in base marketing, is that the games, as childish as they sound, have been everyone's kind of favorite part of the day. It gives everyone a bit of a laugh and gets you moving. And do you know what? Actually sending people around the house to try and find a Wellington boot, or try and find a SIM card, or like, you know, it's good fun, and everyone loves it because it gets you moving, gets you laughing. The item that I had on a bring me list, Amy, that I quite liked, was an empty bottle of 40% proof alcohol. And so you had to go and try and find like an empty gin bottle or something. And one of the guys on our team, who's like relatively quiet, pretty chilled, he literally reaches behind his laptop and gets a completely empty bottle of Ciroc vodka, which, for those of you that don't know, is like a high-end, it's a really fancy bottle of vodka. You'd buy it in a club and get sparklers, and, you know, it would cost you like 500 quid. But yeah, he literally just reached over his laptop and grabbed this bottle of Ciroc and just turned it upside down, and it was empty. And that's made everyone laugh for a long time after. So
that's great.
Why don't we talk a little bit about tools? What tools did you use when you were in the same building as everyone that you worked with, and the teams that you were Scrum Mastering and coaching? And how have they changed since being in isolation?
So generally speaking, day to day, we would all be in the office. So we kind of have a policy where it's like, work from home 1 day a week, but the squads tended to have a mutual agreement that they wouldn't do that end of sprint for retros and planning and stuff. Some did. So we'd have dial-ins for stand up in the morning, just standard Skype dial-in. Everyone would be voice call. But tools wise in the office, whiteboard, flip chart, post-it notes, Sharpies, all your standard, what you expect. We use Slack as well sometimes for kind of those instant communications, but generally speaking, most stuff would happen over the desk, face-to-face, that sort of thing. That was a big change for us because I think we didn't have access to a lot of the tools. And although we had Skype, it's not the best video calling technology, if you like. And also, all of a sudden, Vodafone was going from very small amounts of people on Skype to huge amounts. And as with a lot of providers, there was always that kind of concern that it wouldn't hold up if you've got the whole organisation on the same Skype call or on a Skype call at the same time. It's gonna fall over, right? Now, I haven't actually had many situations with that. We were quite good early on to use things like Slack for video calls. We're using Zoom now as well, like we are. I think we've tried and tested a few different tools. I think the one that I like the most, that I use the most now, is Mural, because it probably gives the closest feel to a whiteboard that I've come across. And actually, it's got the pre-made templates, which can save you a hell of a lot of time.
What is Mural, probably, just for those that haven't heard of Mural?
It's simply an interactive whiteboard that everyone can go onto. Everyone can add post-it notes, images, information. But it's got some good functionality with things like timers. You can lock your template so that people can only add post-it notes so they don't start moving around images and your nice template you've just set. So I think that for me has probably been the biggest one. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised, if you use that well enough with Zoom, you can actually get some really, really good interactions with teams. I would not choose that over face-to-face. However, I think it's been a lot better than I expected it to be. How about you with your teams?
Well, I mean, just to comment on Mural, we obviously used it with the Agile Avengers team the other day, and we spent a whole day, like 9 till 5, pretty much on Mural. And we've had other days, kind of like Vodafone stuff, where we've been on calls back to back, and you just get to 3 o'clock and you are absolutely dead. And I just found that on Mural, because it was so interactive, you can drag your stickies around the board. You can all be working on the same kind of whiteboard thing at the same time, like super collaborative. It didn't feel that draining. So yeah, I would encourage anyone that's listening to go and check out Mural. It's Mural. I'm sure we'll stick a link in the description. Yeah, I mean, for the teams that I work with, there's been no major changes, but I think Jira, or whatever your tracking tool of choice is for your Scrum board, your Kanban board, your workflow, whether you use Jira, Trello, VSTS, I think it just becomes more important that you are on it with your kind of your board admin. So making sure that stuff is up to date. If you are moving a task or a card around the board, you might want to add comments just to let people know what's happened with it. The stuff that when you're all sat around the same desk, you can just shout out. But actually, when you're remote, you can't do that. So what is you think in your mind is a small thing, you might need to just make a little comment in your Jira card or your Trello card just to reflect what's going on. And again, I think my experience is with teams that have already got good habits in place. So when we do go remote, they've already got a good habit of how to use Jira. They've got good habits of how to use Skype for daily stand-ups. They've got good habits just around email etiquette, and trying not to fill people's inboxes up, and trying to use kind of WhatsApp and IM and stuff. So I just think, again, I would be interested to see a team where they hadn't built those good habits, then they go into isolation, and actually then it would really start to show. I made a comment on LinkedIn not too long ago that actually being in isolation shouldn't really make too much of a difference to a team that have already built those strong habits. And obviously it's going to make a difference to your well-being, and it's going to, like we were saying earlier, you need to make a really conscious effort to keep up lots of good communication and relationships. But actually, in terms of the way that you get work done, there shouldn't be too much of a change if you've taken the time to build some good habits. So we, as I said, we use Jira. So Jira is still being used, and it's being used really effectively. Slack, we've kind of moved away from Skype to Slack. Skype is kind of built into everything we do at Vodafone. It's like the provided service when you first get your laptop and boot it on. But there are parts of the business that have embraced Slack, and in Vodafone UK Digital, as you know, Amy, we've started using Slack. And it's a bit more user-friendly. You've got more options to have groups. You can have channels, you can have team kind of private channels. It's better for like file sharing, and it's a bit more fun. You can throw GIFs and emojis, and so Slack's been really good, because not everyone wants to jump on video calls all the time, but actually people quite enjoy throwing some comments and a bit of banter into a Slack channel. And also, if you are working on a piece of work with a couple of other people, to be able to have a Slack channel for that work stream or for that project, and to not be bombarding people with emails and stuff is really, really cool. So Slack's an awesome tool. I'd recommend anyone to check out Slack if they haven't already used it. If you're using Skype, I think you will quite quickly ditch Skype and move to Slack. So, yeah, be warned. What else has changed since?
That's what I was just thinking.
Being remote for Scrum Masters.
I think, and I would be confident to say this from across a range of Scrum Masters, I think the role has been a lot harder initially, and it's a lot more time consuming and draining. I've definitely seen the drain on Scrum Masters more so than when you're in the office. And I think we noticed that collectively. We put some things in place to try and help with some fun Scrum Master hacks, activities, challenges between us, just to try and help kind of give that level of support across our chapter. Everything seems to take twice as long. Maybe not twice as long, that's an exaggeration. But you, like you said, because you don't have that 2 minutes before a meeting where people are catching up, people want to do that in a call, but because they can only talk one at a time, that takes 15 minutes when before it would have taken 2. So that's the sort of thing that I think has been a big challenge. And I think actually now, I'm not sure I should say this, but I feel like now this is the new normal. And I think people are adjusting, and I think we're kind of getting used to it. But at first, definitely, there was a huge amount of extra kind of effort going into a lot of stuff from the Scrum Master side of things. So yeah, I think that's kind of a key thing. I think a couple of really quick tips, hints. 50-10 type rule. So for every 50 minutes of a meeting, 10 minutes out. We did that with our Agile Avengers Day the other day that Ben mentioned, and that had a huge impact. I think just taking 10 minutes for every 50 you're sat down just gave us that space to kind of walk away, think about stuff. Trying where possible to not be sat down, which is quite ironic considering we're both sat down right now. But if you're on calls with people, do a walk-in talking call. If you're catching up with someone, you don't need the laptop, put your headphones in, walk around. Those small things make a huge difference. I set myself a challenge for April. I'm in shielding, so I'm not allowed to leave the house. And I was being very lazy. So I set myself a challenge of doing 10,000 steps a day. And I'm now, I don't know, what's the date today? Where are we? 23rd.
23rd.
I've only missed it one day by a few hundred steps. And now it's become natural for me to do 10,000 steps a day in the house without even thinking. So I think the earlier you get into some of those small habits, the easier this becomes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were saying it's harder for Scrum Masters. Scrum Masters are often the kind of the go-to for how you're working and kind of ways of working. And we've never seen such a monumental shift in how we work as at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a Scrum Master, you're picking up all sorts of changes, administrative type stuff to keep your teams effective, to keep them happy, keep them productive, that you've never had to do before. And so much of that is soft skills, being able to, read the team, try and gauge where they're at and help steer them towards iterations becoming more effective. In person, when you're physically together, you can do that a heck of a lot easier when you're all sat around, talking face to face. Trying to do that remotely and gauge how everyone's feeling when all you can see is a slightly delayed video, or audio. Not everyone always wants to go on video. That's really tough. And then also to go off the back of that and carry the weight of trying to make sure that everyone's happy, they've got everything they need, they're all set up. I was really just surprised at how, for a lot of people, working from home is tough because they haven't got a desk. If they're in a flat in London, not everyone needs a desk at their home. They don't need an office chair. They've got space to chill out because that's what home is if they go to an office. And now it's like you need to work from home. And it's like, well, I'm just gonna have to stick my laptop on my lap and sit on my sofa. And that's okay for a day if you work from home occasionally. But actually, when you're 6 weeks into sitting on the sofa with a laptop on your lap, your posture is going to be horrendous. Your kind of your neck and your neck from kind of really leaning
just
down. You've got no elbow support, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I don't have all of this stuff which I took for granted in the office. And Scrum Masters are, naturally wanting to serve their teams, and they're trying to go and find all that stuff and sort all that stuff, which is, it's really just like kind of team admin. So it's a huge challenge, but it's quite rewarding as well, because just looking after the team sometimes and keeping them happy and keeping them well is actually the most satisfying thing you can do. But what else have we missed? What else is changing for Scrum Masters at the moment?
Oh, God.
What about delivering training? So Scrum Masters at Vodafone deliver a lot of Agile 101 training to new starters, do a lot of kind of team kickoffs and offsite days. What's that looking like at the moment, Amy?
So we're still doing some stuff. We're still having some training from the amazing guys over at Bliminal. So Mark's doing some training for us through CSP at the moment, which is really good. Actually, we've kind of really enjoyed that, and actually that's helped us take some learnings to go, well, what can we do? What can we use? Because truth is, although we might be going back into offices, it's going to be a long time before we can start bringing people into a central place to do training. And we've still got new starters coming in. So it's not fair to leave those people trying to fumble their way around what things look like for potentially what could be 3 months. We're 6 weeks in. So we're looking at ways that we can still deliver training to these people and get a good engagement and outcome and still hit those learning outcomes without waiting too long. You know, it's not the same. Truth is, it's not the same. You can't do an interactive session for 2 days straight back to back like you would in the office, but it's about working out what you can do. And there's a lot of activities and tools that we've come across that you can still do online, particularly with some of the functionality and the tech that we've now got out there. So I think it's about working with what you've got and kind of weighing that up, you know, making the call that actually the people that we need to train, the benefits of training them in this way is going to outweigh them waiting for this training in 3-4 months time after they've been in the organization for that long and might have already picked up some bad habits from a team they're in or something like that. So I think we made the call earlier on that actually this is the perfect time to give people kind of training. They've probably got more headspace than they do in the office, because people are tending to have a little bit more time when they're not traveling and things like that. So yeah, I think training is a really crucial thing, and it's not something that should be forgotten with everything else that's going on right now.
Yeah, and I think initially we took a view of let's just put everything on hold because we can't really do it at the moment with lockdown. And now that the COVID lockdown, certainly in the UK, is potentially going to go on for at least another few weeks, and there's a strong chance it'll go on a lot longer for people who don't need to physically go out, you know, for people who don't work critical jobs and can work from home. There's probably, I would bet that we'll be working from home for a good chunk of the summer. So we've got to a point where we've had to say, well, we still need to carry on. We need to do training. We need to do business as usual. And actually it's forced us to think, how can we deliver training remotely and still get the same effect? I know I'm as guilty as any other Scrum Master out there of relying very heavily on hands-on activities for training, for retrospectives, and that's great in person. And I wouldn't do it any other way if you were physically in the room with people. But all of a sudden, when you're remote, you can't chuck paper airplanes around to illustrate, illustrate Scrum as, you know, you can't do all the activities, you can't walk around the room, you can't do kind of whiteboarding stuff. You've got to think laterally, and actually that's pushed a few brilliant people, certainly at Vodafone, in the Scrum Master community at Vodafone, to really go, okay, how do we do training but remotely and still get the same effect? How do we still get interactive? How do we still have collaborative hands-on training session? How, as a coach and a facilitator, how can you facilitate from the back of the room whilst being remote? That's been a pretty big question for us. And I think we're only just starting to tap into it and starting to get into what that can actually look like. But that's certainly been something that's been really tricky, I think, for Scrum Masters at Vodafone, especially where we are, who have gone from being very co-located to now very remote.
Definitely.
Amy, any final thoughts?
No. What I will say is, when we sat ourselves down and prepared for this call, firstly, we had a few technical issues. So we might see if we can get an outtake video out there. However, we set ourselves up and we said we're going to do something nice, short, snappy, 15 to 20 minutes. Now, I don't know how long we've been recording, because there's no timer anywhere. So that is lesson number one. Get ourselves a timer so we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Lesson number two, we've definitely gone on a lot longer than we said we were going to. I just don't know how long it is. So that's lessons and reflections from right now. Although I have enjoyed the conversation, it's been quite good to kind of talk through some of those things. I don't think there's any final reflections. I think for me, actually, just, you know, truth is, we have a great chapter in Vodafone where we can have these types of conversations, and we share a lot of this stuff, and we share stuff where we've messed up and things are difficult, and we have people that we can bounce off of to get these kind of ideas and get things moving forward. We also recognize that not everybody's in that position. So actually, I think that we can probably do a little bit more, Ben, just to share some more of this stuff more frequently. So I think that's a commitment that we can make, and And maybe if we don't leave it 6 weeks into lockdown to record something, maybe we'll be a little bit better at keeping to 10, 15 minutes for some short, snappy
100%.
thoughts. So yeah, that is me.
We would love if you are a Scrum Master or an Agile coach or a product owner, or you work in an Agile team, or you work in any team, and you've got thoughts, you've got reflections, please get in touch, drop us a line, drop a comment, send us a message on LinkedIn, head to our website, agileavengershub.com, and go to the contact us page. We'd love to hear from you, and we could potentially even get you on this podcast. We can chat through what's been going on. How has lockdown affected your teams, your industry, your organization, your ways of working? Let us know. Let us know if anything we've said resonates with you. Let us know if anything we've said is helpful. It would be good to know that we're not on our own, when it very
Definitely.
much feels like we're on our own at the moment.
Yeah.
Sat in the same four walls. Cool.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for watching. Subscribe. You can find a button below. You can check us out on LinkedIn. You can check us out on Instagram. You can check us out on Facebook. Our website is www.agileavengershub.com, where you can find loads of resources, blogs, guides for Agile teams, and for being better as a team and being more efficient as an Agilist. So take care. Have a great evening. Catch you guys soon.
Stay safe. Hold on. Your voice and your face are not going at the same time.
That's not very helpful. Yeah, I can see that now.
It's really bad as well. What are you using?
I'm using the...
Yeah, turn that off. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, doesn't sound as good.
Is that better? Is that in sync?
Okay, that's laptop microphone. How does that sound?
That sounds better than the AirPods. The AirPods, you sounded quite far away. Talk slowly. Say something like really obvious.
Lower
hand.
I can lower my hand. There we go.
Go on then. What have we got?
Are we recording?
Yes.
The best beer in my fridge at the moment is Newcastle Brown Ale. Awesome. Cool.